overview that system and highlight how we believe that system addresses and helps us achieve healthy soils and healthy water and high yields. And the latter part of the presentation, Guy Swanson, who is president and founder of Exactrix, is going to provide some more background. So, first of all, I want to overview this system. We're integrating several what I'd call advanced technologies. First of all, no-till injection with minimal soil disturbance, and I'll show you an example of that. We're co-banding NP and K, which has some considerable advantages that I'm going to talk about. We're using RTK guided injection near where the rows will be. A lot of advantages to that. There's excellent uniformity among openers, about 1% coefficient of variation with this system. This is one of the very outstanding features, and the system's very advanced in doing within field adjustment of end rates. And on the source side, we're using anhydrous ammonia, ammonium polyphosphate solution, and one or both of our products, thiosol, which is ammonium thiosulfate, and KTS, or potassium thiosulfate. And those two products, in addition to providing the nutrients, N and S and K, are moderate level nitrification inhibitors that we're taking advantage of in this system. I think you're all familiar with the 4R concept. I think it's fair to say that there's most of the attention on 4Rs is with rate and timing, especially with nitrogen. I think it's fair to say that placement is kind of a stepchild, but here we're featuring several aspects of placement that are very important, not only agronomically but environmentally, in addressing the phosphorus issue that's so important in this area. And as the diagram shows, the 4Rs are all interlocked and interrelated, and although I'm not going to focus much on rate, the system is efficient enough that it does allow lower rates and is used with efficient timing. So we're going to hit on these main topics, how the system implications for healthy soil, healthy water, and nutrient efficiency, high yields, and in that last section, I'll present a case study. And we do believe that the high yields can serve as a driver for adoption of a system like this. So healthy soil implications is pretty easy to cover quickly. This is an example. Shows the system with a single disc with a shoe on the back there that is injecting at fairly high pressure anhydrous ammonia and liquid fertilizers down into that slot. And you can see from the field picture that the system can do that with minimal disturbance, and so that allows us to maintain the healthy aspects of no-till, such as higher organic matter, biological activity, porosity, and so forth. So both that system and the broadcast system that you see there obviously provide minimal disturbance, but there's a big difference between the two in terms of water quality and yield and nutrient efficiency that I want to talk about. So a little bit about system implications for reducing P loss to surface waters, which is so important in this area. One of the challenges that we have to solve, of course, is that when you broadcast phosphorus fertilizers, especially fairly soon after application, before the phosphorus is reacted with the soil, then there's a very high potential for dissolved P runoff, as you can see with the yellow bar. This is an example with DAP, 100 pounds P2O5 per acre broadcast without incorporation. That's a typical maintenance application, and you can see after 10 days there's less potential and so forth. And it's obvious that injection will help essentially eliminate that P loss from recently applied fertilizer. If you look over there for the no P, that's really the P loss you get from the background or the soil test P that most people seem to zero in on, and I'd say, don't forget that recently applied P. The other thing that this system can address is that it's going to give you a reverse stratification instead of what's developed over years in this area with broadcast application and reduced tillage, where you've got a higher concentration near the surface. Knifing in is going to give you a reverse stratification, which should help with the P runoff. But of course, surface P runoff is just half the story in this area in the tile drain. In this study, Doug Smith and others found that on the tile drain system they evaluated in northeast Indiana, on their research fields, 49% of the soluble P and 48% of the total P loss occurred through tile drains, and so that was through macropores. And the question is, can an injection system like we're describing help address that problem also? And it's especially important to note that with no-till, this problem is even greater. In this study, we see that with broadcast P and no-till versus broadcast P just in, the amount of dissolved P being lost in the tile drains was about 3 times higher, and the total P was about 2 times higher. So it's critical that we do something with no-till to help alleviate that situation, and we believe that subsurface injection can do that. And they have a nice diagram to show what's going on there. And basically with no-till, the surface runoff is carrying P to macropores, and there's water and P going down macropores without much interaction with the soil. And in the tilled, you first of all incorporate a lot of the P, and much of the water and P is not going into macropores. And so we really need something to address that situation with no-till. And so injecting P avoids that surface runoff going to those macropores and down, and substitutes a band like I've described there. And so you'd ask, does that help reduce P runoff? Well, phosphorus is very immobile in soil, and so phosphorus in that band is not going to move readily to macropores. Then the question is, what happens when the band intersects a macropore? And we believe that both of these tools will provide some plugging action on macropores so that we can help address that situation with this subsoil injection. So we believe this system will address surface P runoff and P loss through tile drains, and at the same time minimize soil erosion and P loss with particulates going off the field. Okay, let's look at nutrient efficiency improvement factors. What are the reasons that this system improves the nutrient efficiency? First of all, if you're comparing it with broadcast materials that contain urea, such as urea or UAN solution, you've eliminated that ammonia loss that tends to occur from them. You've greatly reduced the early season tie-up in residues because you're applying the material below a lot of the decomposing residues. You've got less denitrification in poorly drained soils because the readily available carbon from the residues near the surface is an important factor for denitrification. And you have better root contact with mobile P and ammonium, and we're going to focus on ammonium quite a bit later in the presentation because we're going to be inhibiting nitrification, and the plant's going to see more ammonium. There are synergies for having those nutrients together in a band that I'm going to talk about, and there's some real advantages of having those bands in close to where the row is going to be, and I'll talk more about that bullet too. So what about the synergies for co-banded NP and S? Well, it's especially important for immoral nutrients because you want as large a fraction of the roots in that band area as you can get, and if you've got those combined nutrients, you're going to have better root growth in there. That's well documented. If you've got the N and P together in there, you're going to have some enhanced solubility of the P because of some of the chemistry going on there. If you've got early season enhanced ammonium nutrition, then you're going to have some benefits there as well. And that's due to some physiological advantages that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but they have to do with the plant maintaining charge balance and pH balance and some energy conservation early in the plant's growth and some enhancement of a growth regulator. Okay, so what about the importance of having that band in there close to the where the row is going to be? Real important for early growth stages. I'm going to show you a couple examples of that before we get to the case study. You get quicker root growth into those bands. With no-till, you have slower release of nutrients from organic matter early in the season, so it's all that much more important than no-till to have those bands close to the row. And it's important for immobile nutrients, as I've indicated. And I believe that by having those bands in really close to the row, as close as we can get them without causing any damage, there'll be some situations where we can preclude the need for application with the planter, and that'll allow faster planting and more timely planting. This is just an example of where Microessentials SC was injected directly below the row versus various distances from the row to supply 35 pounds of N, 100 pounds of P2O5, 25 pounds of zinc, sulfur and some zinc. And you can see there was a distinct advantage of having that band directly in the row, about 4 inches below the row. And this was even with a very high soil test P. And I think we can see some stronger responses even with a more typical soil test level. This is recent data showing that with N, I think that we can show a pretty big benefit by having the pre-plant part of the N applied directly below the row. And the last two treatments are a comparison there, where 90 pounds of urea N was pre-plant broadcast incorporated and then 90 pounds side dressed. That gave a yield of over 3 locations, a 266 bushel. And the only change then in the second treatment is that instead of broadcasting that pre-plant 90 pounds, pre-plant 90 pounds was banded below the row, 6 inches below the soil surface, gave a 12 bushel increase. And so I think that's an example of where we can supercharge that early growth and set that plant on a trajectory for higher yields. Okay, let's take a look at a case study here that illustrates some of these points. The objective of this case study was to evaluate the integrated system for achieving yield increases via early season enhanced ammonium nutrition using the integrated 4R system that I've described. And this was on irrigated no-till corn following soybeans. It was in 9-inch paired rows that were on 36-inch centers. This is the machine that was used for the application, and the openers were on 18-inch centers, and they were operated to straddle where the 9-inch paired rows were going to be, so the bands were 4.5 inches from the paired rows. And I showed this picture before. This is an illustration of minimal disturbance that you can achieve with that. This was on a Hastings silt loam in Nebraska. These are the treatments. All treatments received a total of 170 pounds of N per acre, 35 pounds of P2O5 per acre, all co-injected together. Treatment 4 there only had 145 pounds of N per acre. We had that in there to help us evaluate where we were on the yield curve with the 170 treatments. And then we had a series of nitrification inhibitor treatments. Treatments 3 and 4 both received standard rate of N-serve. Treatment 2 received a fairly low rate of DCD to give us a lower level of nitrification inhibition. Treatments 5 and 6 were ammonium thiosulfate, thiazole, applied at 10 to provide 10 and 20 pounds of sulfur per acre, and then the next treatment had DCD added onto that to enhance the ammonium nutrition further. And treatments 8, 9, and 10 were similar, but with KTS. Soil test levels were for sulfur and K were high enough that we didn't expect a response to those nutrients, so we were expecting most of the nutrients to be due to enhanced ammonium nutrition. We don't think that reduced N losses were a big factor because the 145 N rate gave the same as the 170 N rate, which means the 170 treatments could have lost 25 pounds of N without affecting yield. So we think we're looking at an enhanced ammonium nutrition response here. Plots were 36 feet wide by half mile long, good precision with a 4.1 LSD. And here are the yield results. See the control with 243 without any inhibitor. The DCD boosted yields up to 249. The two N-serve treatments are at 251. And then the series with the thiazole, 249, and then the higher rate, 254, and then adding DCD on top of that, 257 for an increase from 243 control to 257. The KTS gave a similar series of yield increases. So what were the increases in nitrification inhibition that we saw? The red line shows that. The N-serve treatments preserved about, at planting time, a little over 60% of the N as ammonium. The thiosulfate treatments were down in the 0.25 to roughly 0.4 range. And so I think the way to look at these data is to graph the yield versus the fraction of N that was maintained as ammonium. And we've done that, and we got a very nice relationship showing that indeed we got a nice response to enhanced ammonium nutrition, and that probably the N-serve maintained too much ammonium, nitrogen as ammonium. And so we're going to be expanding on this work. We think that this can be a factor to boost yields in this system that we described. So this just says that we think we can get a boost with enhanced ammonium nutrition. We did a similar trial with the band 7 inches from the rows and didn't get this enhanced ammonium nutrition response. And so we think it's very important to get these bands in close to the row. Just note, as probably most of you know, there's a lot less sulfur deposition now in this part of the world, and if we don't apply sulfur, we're going to be mining, and we're going to be seeing higher and higher probabilities of response to sulfur. And we think that we're looking at getting a dual response from our thiosulfates from sulfur and enhanced ammonium nutrition. So the bottom line is that integrating these three things here that I've talked about provides a healthy, a triple win for healthy soils, healthy water, and high yields. And we think high yields can drive adoption. So, Guy, it's yours.
Hey, good day, Alex. This is Guy Swanson calling in today, your Great Plains reporter. And I thought you'd just love to see what's going on here at the Ganger Seed Farm in Shelton, Nebraska. That's not too far from Grand Island. We're on irrigated center pivot, corn on corn rotation, banding taps, Exactrix taps at about 7 miles per hour. And these openers band deep. They go in about 7 to 8 inches in depth, and they run at speeds up to 12 miles per hour. And of course, they handle tremendous amounts of residue and are able to get on such high levels of uniformity and high quality taps that our fertilizer is about 166% more crop available as nitrogen and about 200% more crop available as phosphate in triammonium polyphosphate sulfate. Well, this has been quite a day out here, and Brian Krackemeyer of our videographer has been out with his drone to get some great shots in no-till. And there's a big no-till movement in Nebraska, and many of you are not aware of it. It's because of the expense of farming today is so close, the margins are close, and we're looking for 150 more net dollars an acre. That's our goal, and that's because we don't use as much nutrient. We do it variable rate site-specific, as in this case, and we're trying to hold that nitrogen in the root zone. And this is one of the problems in Nebraska. We don't export the nitrogen; it just stays in the ground and moves to the drinking water. So we've got to be really careful about how we time it. And the beauty of this machine is we can apply, we can run the planter the same day in the field because of the 15-inch band spacing. Well, that's the great report coming in today from the Ganger Seed Farm in Shelton, Nebraska. Exactrix P51 Mustang openers on the job, running at high speed. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad to be here with you this morning. I'm from Spokane, Washington. My name is Guy Swanson. I've been out here before. Randall Reeder's a good friend. We're going to do a little history lesson today. I'm not going to do a presentation with a bunch of graphs. I'm just going to show you some pictures. And these are historical pictures. And we're going to go back about 50 plus years. It's a long time. Man's life, you begin to realize that things have changed. And of course, we didn't have all this technology when agriculture first started. Well, there's a tale here of two regions. And of course, the Lake Erie problem is with phosphate runoff. We now got it pinpointed pretty well. The Palouse region is another tale to tell, and it's related to fish, water quality, soil loss, and severe environmental damage to the dams of the Snake and the Columbia. The tremendous amount of money flowed into this part of the world in about 1972 till about 1986. That's because these dams were critical for generating power to build aluminum, for navigation, recreation, and the big thing was the fishery. This is the Palouse River. It's not really a river, it's a mud flow. And David Montgomery showed you some of the pictures of the land as it left the Palouse country. This river never had salmon go up it. It had a terminal cataract that was a 190-foot waterfall. So the farmers were pretty vicious to the land. Initially, they didn't realize the asset they had. And of course, as we begin to understand, like David did not explain, where did all the soil go? And in this particular case, you know where it's at. It's in the rivers, the streams, and behind the dams. So historically speaking, we're talking that period of 1960 up until about 1985 was a tremendous period of soil loss. And this relates to your farming practices here, is that we've got to do something about the runoff and the fertilizer runoff into the lake. So equipment has developed. This is the final version here, so to speak, or the current version of how to manage nutrients and get the nutrients site-specifically, positionally, and ideally chemically available for the plant. So we're utilizing a lot of specific techniques, including a 1% coefficient of variation of application. So that means only 1 pound out of 100 pounds is out of place. So you're able to bring your application rates way down to about half to 2/3 of the university recommendation. And those old recommendations are based on top dress application systems. Simply by getting it absolutely uniform and positioned, then you don't have to apply as much. The phosphate requirement is about half to 1/3 of what you're presently using. So these technologies come from the past. They're presented to producers in Ohio to utilize the millions of dollars that was spent by the federal government to try to figure out how to make fertilizer more efficient. So you can see these slopes are steep and they're rolling. Let's keep going here, Troy. Steep, steep soils. Highly productive, the most erosive in the nation. The rivers, critical to the fishery. The dams building power. We had a tremendous period in there where the investment was very, very heavy into the power generation industry. And those dams are breachable. You can see that one side of the dam can be taken out. And that's because we didn't know if we could stop soil erosion. Those fish are swimming clear to that lake in Idaho at 6,500 feet. So fishing's important too in Lake Erie. Very similar. So we've identified the problem. We've got to be more efficient with the nutrients. We've got to conserve the soil. And we have to make money all the way. This is 1968. Detroit 671 in that Caterpillar tractor. And we're plowing in ammonia in the fall. You see the brome grass in the foreground there. And that plow was parked that last year. That's the last year it was ever plowed. So we were beginning to move ahead. By 1974, we were no-tilling, built specific machines to get the nutrients in the ground. We call that Old Yeller. And then there were several machines or copies of it that were made later on. And then by 1980, we knew that we could no longer top dress the nutrients. It was getting away from us, it was getting in the streams, and it was not available to the crop. So as we progress here, we'll see machines that actually moved into the placement category, and all the nutrients were placed at the same time. This is circa 1980. And Troy, let's roll up a little bit more here. And these are the first placement machines. Banded ammonia. Did a rotational grid, took a look at all the different crops that could be raised, discovered that we probably weren't raising the right crop. And today remains the problem that we're raising the wrong crop. So recently there's been a real emphasis to winter canola. This is what winter rape looks like, winter canola. This is about an hour presentation, so I'm trying to condense it as much as possible. This is the placement technique. It was done with anhydrous ammonia and dry fertilizer. Large diameter blades. Once again, we got the rotation changed. We got the soil loss under control, and some of these dams were able to stay in play. Winter rape, winter canola. So I might suggest to you, as I listened to David Brandt here earlier, that maybe we're raising the wrong crop, even in Ohio. Might have to take a look at a deep-rooted crop, a winter annual crop like canola. Paired row technology, Montana scenario there, some of the tooling. So historically, we went ahead and resolved the problem with these new techniques. Today, as we roll on to about the 43rd slide here, we moved into much more dynamic approaches by moving to a two-pass design and building these machines that band the nutrients prior to production or in the growing crop, so you can time it in perfectly well. This picture's taken in Texas, big dryland farm down there. This is taken in Kansas. This guy actually is a CPA. He figured it out. He ran all the budgets, decided to go on his 7,000 acres. He went to two-pass design, banding the nutrients in. This is the formulator part of it, where we bring all the nutrients together, crystallize them, and combine them. And in this particular case, where you have such a keen level of uniformity and ideal chemistry, that we can reduce the rate. So the standard rate and variable rate site-specific for nitrogen is about 0.6 of a pound of N per bushel produced. This is the product that's built. This is one of the advantages of banding and doing rotational band loading, is that those old bands remain crop available for future crops. And that's why the phosphate bill goes way, way down, because you don't use as much. You're only going to use about a third of what you're using right now, because those residual bands stay in place. They don't move, they're crystallized, and they're located in such a proximity that only the growing crop can find it. Typical no-till application there. Another shot at the growing crop. Big rigs in Kansas conditions. Double cropping scenarios, banding nutrients in difficult conditions, snowy conditions. We can run under very wet conditions. Nebraska picture. All of it's VR site specific now. Almost every single machine is VR site specific. So the injection of the ammonia is done at high pressure as a liquid state, 1% coefficient of variation. Why don't I go ahead and finish up here, and I think there may be some questions. And historically, I took you from about 1968 up to the current scenario. The machinery changes, but the people have to move along with it too. And so the changing scenario here in Ohio, it's nothing new. It's just got to change. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you. Do we have questions for either Bert or Guy? We have time for a couple quick questions.
I may have overwhelmed them.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to switch over the technology